The world's oceans are still to this day almost completely unexplored. What lies beneath the dark depths of our waters? Let's take a look at 15 amazing underwater discoveries. Number 15. The SS Gairsoppa. Deep-sea explorers dream of finding long-lost treasure beneath the waves, but this very rarely becomes a reality. It is possible, though, and happened recently with the discovery of a wreck from World War II. In 1919, the SS Gairsoppa, a British steam merchant ship, first launched in Jarrow, England, and would go on to have a successful civilian career until the Second World War. When fighting broke out, however, she was commandeered for use to transport cargo as part of a convoy between India and Allied bases, until February of 1941, when she'd depart on her final voyage. As part of convoy SL-64, she was carrying a huge consignment of silver bullion, but after running low on fuel, left the convoy and made her way toward the Galway in Ireland. She never made it, though, because she was struck by a torpedo from a German U-boat and sank in the Atlantic with the loss of all 85 lives on board. For a long time, the wreck was lost to the sea, but it was rediscovered again in 2011. A huge salvage operation was conducted to try to retrieve what remained of the estimated $200 million worth of cargo. And within 2 years, the Odyssey Marine Exploration Company from Florida announced that it had, so far, managed to recover at least 48 tons of silver. Now it's thought 61 tons have been recovered at a value of around $210 million, and the company themselves, as part of the arrangement for recovery, were entitled to 80% of the proceeds. Number 14. The oldest known naval battle. People have sailed the oceans for thousands of years, and while the majority of voyages were for explorations and transport, it didn't take long until armed ships would patrol the coasts and engage with the enemy forces. It's not known when the first war at sea took place, but researchers have found the remains of the oldest naval battle that we currently know of in the Mediterranean. The Agadi Islands had long been seen as a potentially valuable archaeological site, as they lie on one of the main trade routes between Tunisia and Rome and have been used as a waypoint for thousands of years. Historical records talk of the Battle of the Agadi Islands in the year 241 BC, when the Romans sank 50 Carthaginian ships and took almost 10,000 prisoners. After a concerted effort, researchers have found they believe to be the remains of the Carthaginian fleet. So far, 19 ancient warship rams have been found, and these mark where the ships would have laid on the sea floor before the wooden components of their hulls decayed. It was the first time an ancient naval battle site had ever been discovered, and the learnings the team made from it mean that they could one day break their own record by finding an even older one. Number 13. Vought F4u Corsair. The Vought F4u was a model of fighter aircraft that was used by the U.S. troops primarily during the Second World War and the Korean War. They were produced between 1942 and 1953, during which time 12,500 were built. They were seen as an incredibly effective aerial fighter. Not all of them performed as expected, however. The most famous one went missing during a training exercise. A routine mission saw it being flown over the ocean by Oahu in Hawaii, but the pilot began to notice the engine starting to sputter. He realized that he was running out of fuel and had no choice but to make a careful descent and land on the water. Amazingly, he managed to touch down without causing any damage to the plane. But while he was successfully recovered, the aircraft wasn't, and it sank to the ocean floor. Now, at a depth of 115 feet, it's become a popular dive site for visitors and is considered to be only suitable for advanced divers because of the strong currents in the area. The aircraft has, of course, decayed in the salty water and is now covered with coral and population of eels. But it's a fascinating way to see a piece of World War history. Number 12. The Silfra Rift. While the surface of our planet may seem firm and stable to us, we know that things aren't entirely that simple. The Earth's crust is constantly moving, and when enough pressure builds up, this can result in earthquakes along tectonic boundaries. The forces of the plates moving against one another isn't always so destructive, however, and there's a unique underwater place near Iceland where you can see the movement of the Eurasian and the North American plate in action. Known as the Silfra Rift, it's where the two are pulling away from each other and have formed a series of fissures and narrow canyons. The gaps are wide enough to swim through, but close enough that you can touch both continents with each hand, and because of the crystal clear waters, are some of the most incredible dive sites in the world. They're also valuable for researchers who can see firsthand how the process of tectonic activity takes place and the types of rocks and formations that develop when this happens. It's led to a greater understanding of how our planet works and has even helped develop predictive modeling to project how the plates may move and act in the future. Number 11. Crop circles. When you go swimming underwater, you'll often see strange shapes in the sand of the ocean floor. Usually, these are caused by ripples of the currents that swirl around and will be seemingly random patterns. But in 1995, divers off the coast of Japan found structures that seemed to be much more deliberate. They became known as underwater crop circles, and researchers had no idea how their formation was possible. They modeled oceanic flows and simply couldn't explain how such perfectly circular ridges were being created in the sand, but they hadn't accounted for any unknown creatures that may live nearby. After years of study, they finally found the answer. These circles were actually being created by a previously undiscovered species of pufferfish. It's part of their mating ritual where the males swim along the sea floor while flapping their fins, and they're able to displace the sediment to form these amazing structures. Despite being only 5 inches long, these circles can on occasions be up to 7 feet across. It takes the fish many days to complete, but their efforts are worth it when in the end they attract a mate who lays her eggs in the center. Number 10. Blackbeard's Cannons. Of all the pirates that once sailed the 7 seas, the most notorious is undoubtedly Blackbeard. Thought to have begun life as a privateer, he moved to the Bahamas and joined the crew of Captain Hornigold in 1716. He was soon given his own ship by Hornigold, and after his mentor's retirement, Blackbeard went on to capture a French slave ship called La Concorde, which he renamed Queen Anne's Revenge. He fitted her with 40 guns and built up a crew of 300 men, and for the next year would rampage across the Caribbean and take any ship that they came across. Things culminated in November of 1718, however, when he and a group of other pirate leaders attempted to take Charlestown in South Carolina for themselves. The battle didn't go to plan, and in order to escape, he was forced to run a ship aground on a sandbar near the town of Beaufort in North Carolina, and it was eventually covered by water and lost to history. That was until 1996, when a private research team announced what they called one of the greatest oceanic discoveries ever. After meticulous research, they had found the remains of the Queen Anne's Revenge and were making plans to salvage what they could. Rumors ran rife that the ship may still contain some of vast treasures that Blackbeard managed to accumulate during his career, but so far only a few artifacts, part of the ship's hull, and some of the cannons have been retrieved. While the ship may not contain any treasure, it's still an incredible find, and one of the most important historical sites from the 18th century to have ever been discovered. Number 9. Mongolian Shipwrecks. Between 1274 and 1281, there was a massive effort by the Mongol Empire to take control of the Japanese archipelago. Led by Kublai Khan, thousands of ships were sent to take troops to the shores, but they were met with tragedy along the way. On both occasions when a massive armada was sent, the Mongol fleet was struck by a typhoon that sank nearly all of them. It's from this story that the word kamikaze was first used, which roughly translates to mean the divine wind. And because of the typhoons, the Mongols were never able to take control of Japan. For a long time, the story of an enemy being defeated by fortunate storms was seen as legend, and very few people thought there was any truth to it. This all changed in the early 2000s, however, when the wreck of a Mongolian ship was found off the southern coast of Japan. Buried deep in sediment, researchers were able to recover a 40-foot-long piece of the keel, which had a number of other pieces of wood attached to it. Several pieces of Chinese pottery were also found at the site, which helped to date and identify the ship, and it's almost certainly one of the more than 4,000 that are believed to have gone missing during one of the typhoons. Thousands of further artifacts have now also been found in the region, and there are hopes that it may be possible to restore the entire ship and potentially even find further wrecks nearby. We are constantly adding more people to the Top 5's production team to bring you all the best content. Be sure to subscribe with notifications on and hit the like button. Number 8. The Great Blue Hole. The oceans of the world remain largely unexplored, but what we do know is that they're covered in unique formations, unlike anything that's seen on land. One of the most mysterious and incredible things you'll ever see in the water is a blue hole, and the most spectacular of them all can be found off the coast of Belize. Known simply as the Great Blue Hole, it's near the center of Lighthouse Reef, which is a small atoll that's around 43 miles offshore from the mainland. At 1,043 feet wide and 407 feet deep, it's the result of glacial erosion that took place between 153,000 and 15,000 years ago. Back then, the ocean levels were much lower, and the blue hole was a cave. But as the waters rose, it was flooded and became what it is today. Jacques Cousteau declared the hole as one of the best diving sites in the world. And when you're inside, you'll not only see the stalactites that formed when it was a cave, but you'll be surrounded by a wealth of sea life, from parrotfish and other small fish species to reef sharks, hammerheads, and even bull sharks. It's also thought that the blue hole may in fact be connected to a wider cave system that runs beneath the seabed, and there are some theories that it may connect all the way back to the mainland, with the caves in Belize and the Yucatan Peninsula that are called cenotes. Number 7. The Uluburan Shipwreck. Sponge divers in Turkey are far more familiar with what's beneath the surface of the ocean around the coast than anyone else, and for researchers, they're an invaluable resource. In 1982, one was asked if he had seen anything of interest, and he drew a basic sketch of something that he had seen, which made the team who asked him very excited. Appearing to be like a metal biscuit with ears, they realized it could be something ancient and arranged a research mission as soon as it was feasible. This resulted in the discovery of the Uluburan Shipwreck, which is a remarkably well-preserved wreck considering it dates back to the late Bronze Age more than 3,400 years ago. Over the following 10 years, regular trips were made to survey the site, and it's believed that the ship left a Cypriot or a Syro-Palestinian port on its way to somewhere west of Cyprus, possibly in the Aegean Sea. At 52 feet long, the builders would have made the shell first before adding what was necessary to sail, and it's quite primitive in design. It had 24 stone anchors, and designs like this had never before been seen in the Aegean, which is why researchers believe it traveled from so far away. Of course, over thousands of years, it's decayed so much that there's no chance of retrieving it, but there's a nearby museum that's dedicated to it, as life-size replicas so people can learn more about it. Number 6. The world's longest known animal. What would you say is the longest animal in the world? A giant whale, or perhaps even a snake would be a good guess. But in April of 2020, researchers announced that they discovered something that's much, much longer. As a part of a new study of the deep sea off the coast of Australia, more than 30 new species had been found. But the one that stood out the most was a new species of siphonophore that was far beyond anything anyone had expected. The predators are similar to jellyfish in that they float in the ocean with a series of tentacles hanging from them. When a fish swims into the tentacles, they are injected with venom, and the siphonophore slowly guides the prey up towards its main body so that it can begin digesting the nutrients. In fact, siphonophores are made up of a number of different clones of themselves that all work together, and this one was simply huge, at a length of 150 feet. This makes it more than twice the length of a blue whale, and 3 times the length of a humpback. The research was conducted in a protected area called the Gascoyne Coast bioregion, and this particular discovery was made purely by chance as the submersible was returning to the surface. It's possible, therefore, that there are ones that are far bigger still, and it's hoped a future research trip may be able to find one. Number 5. Ancient Greek City. In 1967, a diver who was swimming in the water off the Punta coast in Greece made an astonishing discovery. He noticed what looked like structures beneath the waves, and when a research team investigated the following year, they realized that it was the long-lost city of Pavlopetri. Originally a Bronze Age settlement, it's thought that people first started living there around 5,000 years ago. But around 1,000 years BC, a series of earthquakes caused the soft ground it was built on to crumble, and it fell into the sea. As it never re-emerged, it wasn't rebuilt on or used for agriculture, and provided a unique window into the past, because despite being eroded over the centuries by the ocean, its layout remains exactly how it would have been when it was in use. It's one of the oldest submerged cities to have ever been discovered, and has provided a valuable insight into how communities lived so long ago. Sonar techniques have been used to map the site, and so far at least 15 buildings have been identified, each of which is in a depth of up to 13 feet of water. Only a fraction of the site has actually been looked at though, with just 2.2 acres having been charted. It's believed the city could have covered a much wider area, and while the ruins of the other buildings aren't immediately obvious, further research may be able to scan beneath the sediment to fully reveal the extent of the settlement. Number 4. Brinicles. Icebergs are some of the biggest hazards faced by ships, but they pose even deadlier conditions for marine life that swim around them. Studies have been conducted around them, and other formations of sea ice have found that there's a strange phenomenon that occurs underneath them, one that's known as a brinicle, or more frighteningly, the icy finger of death. We all know that water freezes at a temperature of 32 degrees Fahrenheit, but this can change due to atmospheric pressure and the presence of salt. When seawater turns to ice because of falling temperatures, it actually begins to turn solid at 32 degrees and expels the brine water that remains liquid. This is channeled through the cracks and openings of the developing ice and is eventually released beneath the formation. By the time this happens, it's already far below freezing point and is much denser than normal seawater, so it falls to the ocean floor and instantly freezes any water that comes into contact with it. This forms icy stalactites that reach down beneath the icebergs and sheets, which are hollow inside where the brine water continues to flow. Once the liquid reaches the bottom, it spreads out in all directions, and any creature that's unfortunate enough to be in its path is frozen in place. Number 3. Thonis Heraklion. In 1933, a British Air Force pilot was flying over Abu Qir Bay off the Mediterranean coast of Egypt when he noticed what looked like structures beneath the water. He reported what he had seen, but it would be another 65 years until researchers were able to pinpoint a location and investigate what lay down there. To their surprise, they had found the ancient cities of Thonis and Heraklion, which until the time had been thought to be two separate places, but thanks to this discovery have now been proved to be one and the same. The remains are now 1.5 miles off the coast and are submerged beneath 30 feet of water. It was once one of the most important of Egypt's ports, responsible for seafaring trade across the region, and it's thought that people first began to settle there around 3,200 years ago. It became particularly important during the final days of the pharaohs, and was already known about because of a number of mentions in ancient Egyptian and Greek texts. Quite what happened to the city isn't entirely clear, but it's obvious that the ground it once stood on underwent some significant changes to end up so far off the coast. It's thought likely that the city was struck by a series of earthquakes, tsunamis, and floods, and the land would have liquefied, which caused the city to sink. Number 2. Ancient Mine. Humans have, for thousands of years, valued rare minerals and metals, and the extent to which we'll go to attain these treasures is always a surprise. In 2020, researchers announced the discovery of a remarkable find in an underwater cave in Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, which they believe is the oldest known mine in the Americas. Seemingly dating to around 12,000 years ago, the people of the time used it to dig red ochre from the surrounding rock. It's long been known that ancient people used the vast cave networks for spiritual purposes and as a place of refuge before water levels rose and they became flooded. But this is the first time that evidence of this type of activity have been found. What's surprising is how dangerous an endeavor this would have been. Even today, with all the specialist equipment at their disposal, divers have to be extremely careful about entering the labyrinthine caves to ensure they return safely. Even without the added complication of water, it would have been quite easy to get lost down there, and they would have been incredibly brave to enter the darkness in search of ochre. The evidence suggests the caves were used as mines for at least 2,000 years, but for some reason all activity stopped around 10,000 years ago, even though the caves would have still been accessible then. It's not clear why the practice ended, but it's quite possible they found a much easier source, and further explorations may find similar mines that are closer to the surface. Number 1. Apollo 11 engines. The 1960s and 70s were the heydays of space exploration, which saw a series of flights into orbit and to the moon on spacecraft that were launched atop the huge Saturn V rockets. Unlike today, when developments are being made to reuse rockets, these were one use only, and the flight path of the spacecraft was specifically designed so that discarded rockets would fall into the ocean away from human civilization. They were all assumed to have been lost forever, but Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, launched a project to try to rediscover them. In 2012, he proudly announced his success, as he had located what he believed to be the engines from the Apollo 11 mission in 1969 that first took people to the moon, and the next step of the project was to try to retrieve them away from their watery grave. This was far easier said than done, however, because they had found a debris field of an F1 engine parts that were 14,000 feet beneath the ocean's surface. Eventually, though, they were able to retrieve enough components to rebuild 2 of the 65 engines that were launched, although it's proving to be difficult to determine exactly which missions they were used for, because most of the serial numbers have worn away under the extreme pressures and environments that they've been subjected to. Watch our Waves playlist for more top 15 videos about massive waves. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best wave videos.